Okay, now we enter part two in this. Sorry that one cut off a little abruptly there whenever I was bending down the camera to try to show cubits in the holy city that's shown here. I touched the thing that's supposed to zoom in and it said, no, you mean cut the whole thing off and save it. It's okay, it was right at 30 minutes. I was probably only going to go to 45, but I was going to try to get all of these elemental shapes of Pythagoras in this one. So we'll have to find a creative place to stop the next one, or maybe an interesting point right in the middle of something. Let's continue with Randall Carlson here.
And that's actually what we're talking about then when we're talking about a tropical or solar day. We're talking about exactly one rotation of the Earth on its axis relative to the sun. Okay. Then we have the icosahedron, which is 20 faces, all equilateral triangles. You can see if you look at the vertex of this thing, you'll see that there are 5 faces clustered around each vertex. So if we were to split an edge,
and so actually it's a pentagram or a pentagon. This is actually the 20-sided dice that's used in Dungeons and Dragons. It really only gives you a 5% chance per number and per roll because 5 times 20 is 100. And we're looking to break the 100 percentile moment here. Damn, it keeps doing that.
insert another triangle, what it would happen is it would flatten out into a hexagon, a flat hexagon, with 6 equilateral triangles about its center. In any case, there are 20 of these triangular faces. 20 times 180 is 3,600. So again, we have...
That's an important Sumerian number. It's the length of time of a sar. But there are other of these elements that also equal the times, as which he just spoke of in the solar year and so on. So you can see these shapes equal time, equal distance, equal degrees, which is all built on sacred geometry. Oh, it gets deeper, guys. Let's dive in here down this rabbit hole.
One of our 9s, and then our final is our dodecahedron. My favorite shape. This is what Plato referred to the dodecahedron as being the shape of the universe itself.
Now that's a 12-sided dice, and if you look, all of its faces are made of pentagons, but all fit together just nicely, kind of like a soccer ball, and giving that idea. And so they said that this was the shape of the universe itself, and we'll find a correlation to the reality of that also too. But were the people of this time understanding that there's a whole universe, that the cosmos was much bigger than just this simple solar system, that we were in our solar system as a part of that great Milky Way that goes across the sky, that they saw nebulas and blurbs like clouds and thought that might be more distant swirls like the one that we're in? Well, that swirl that's going on in our galaxy and in the other galaxies that we can find has to do with sacred geometry too. So yes, there's a connection. It's not the one that we have today in any way, and you have to step outside yourself to understand these people were trying to understand the way the world works, the face of God, if you will, to see how we've all gotten here. This search has brought us to the point that we are today, and it involves sacred geometry so much more than you're taught, or that a lot of people that talk about this are even willing to believe, because you talk about great strides in humanity. Apparently the point that left to this mathematical equation thought that went to everything and made correlations. Then later they connected it to gods, and through their correlations and what they did that have to do with this element, that have to do with this amount of time, that have to do with certain things, led us to where we are today. Secrets hidden inside of stuff that you didn't even know were there right in front of you the whole time. Had people respond, yeah, I read that and didn't catch any of that. Well, because you didn't know these weird numbers. But once you find out the weird numbers and then you start looking into it, the story means a whole nother layer, doesn't it?
The dodecahedron, you'll notice, has 12 faces, 20 vertices, whereas the icosahedron has 20 faces and 12 vertices. So they're duals of each other. We could actually suspend this icosahedron. If the dodecahedron was hollow, we could put it inside. We would discover that each corner of the icosahedron coincided with the center of the pentagonal face of the dodecahedron.
Well, in actuality, you can take many of the faces and put them inside of each other, and how one encompasses the other. And it's almost like a game of rock, scissors, paper, stone that you can do with this type of idea that goes on, and what wins versus what. And strangely, that's also the way that it works.
With the center of the pentagonal face of the dodecahedron. Okay, each pentagonal face, as we found out, each edge was 108. 5 times 108 is 540. 12 times 540, as it says, is 6,480. So again,
that's that number again, or a number that we need to write down if it's not done yet. But let's just continue here and remember this. He'll refer back to it a couple of times. And maybe after watching this a few times, you'll end up making the correlations or connections and understand it to another level.
We've got the number 9 redundantly occurring over and over again in these measures. Okay, 6,480 turns out to be a critically important number as well, as you're going to see as we proceed along here. Oh, and then we have the star tetrahedron, which would be 2 tetrahedrons interlaced, and I don't have one of those today, but
it actually does look like a star. It's a strange thing, and then you can see that there are some references in some seals and other things in ancient Sumer that show it connected to things that mentally are connected to the same thing, showing you they're using that symbology in the same way.
If you can picture a tetrahedron like this, and then one like this interlaced, it gives you this, what's known as sometimes the star tetrahedron, or the stellated octahedron. It is composed.
Notice that it is 2 of the 720s put together, which make 1440. Again, 1, 4, 4 is 9.
Of 2 tetrahedrons, each of 720. So here again, now you're seeing the repetition of this same number, 1440, being the measure of the star tetrahedron. Okay, so now we're going to talk about time measures. The first thing we're going to look at is astrological time cycles. I don't know how many of you have studied astrology, but in this particular scheme of time, the total duration of the precessional cycle, which is 25,920 years, this is the motion of the Earth on its axis like this, or you can think of it like this. The axis of the Earth actually forms sort of an hourglass motion, a long, slow period of rotation. It's you could consider Earth's third motion. Next to.
So he said it looks like an hourglass when it spins around, and there are people that are in this and say, you know, that one of eternity that they have, infinity, which is like an hourglass. And then you say, why would you use an hourglass? Because it's always defined. Well, yes, but then there's an idea that it keeps going and keeps going in the idea of infinity. And that's a symbol of understanding the precession of the Earth and its wobble. You know, it spins, We all go around the sun one full time in there, and during that process, it does a wobble that goes in, which ends up going on and off with winter and time and so on. Let's realize that here.
To its first motion, which is the daily rotation of the Earth on its axis, its second motion, which is the orbit of the Earth around the sun, and its third motion, which is the precession of the Earth's axis. The diurnal or daily rotation of the Earth on its axis gives us the day-night cycle, which is obviously of critical importance to our life down here on Earth. The orbit around the sun also is likewise of critical importance because that's the yearly cycle. The third motion is what the ancients referred to as the great year. And it's been measured by astronomers at slightly over 50 seconds of arc of motion per year, which actually puts the astronomically determined number slightly less than this one. But we don't know that that's necessarily constant for the whole cycle. In any case,
it looks like it slightly speeds up and slightly slows down somewhat. And then, of course, the zodiac is not exactly separated 12 perfect portions of a pie. They kind of overlap and so on. And we're right now in the dawning of the age of Aquarius, like this hippie song was whenever I was a kid. And of course, some of the correlations they start whenever all these alignments happen, and it's just that stuff that sounds cool. It wasn't the be-all, end-all of anything. But yeah, so you can even see here that it's got a misnomer with it. When we talk about the Dendera zodiac, you can see things are squinched in certain places that you look in the sky and they aren't quite like that. But that was to give representation in a certain form, in a certain angle, or to see things mostly one way. And some guy put it as simply as, when they made it, they did all of this from this side and then started adding on the others as they went around the pie.
It's the ancient number that was typically attributed to this great year cycle was 25,920 years. That great year was considered to be analogous to our annual year. And just as the annual year was divided into 4 seasons of spring, summer, winter, and fall, likewise the great year was divided into 4 great seasons, symbolized by the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac: the bull, the lion, the eagle, and the man or the angel.
The man or the angel, as he's saying there. But you notice how he said the eagle when he shows Scorpio. That's because it used to have a different nomenclature towards it or whatever, just like a few of others that they had over time have changed somewhat. I think the amazing thing is, as we showed in the other video about discussing the zodiac, how it really hasn't changed. In fact, I showed a guy that's Martin is his name, Martin B. Switman, and he gave a dissertation at a conference there talking about how they found at Göbekli Tepe representations, and short of the fox being inserted for a certain creature that's different than that, it's all pretty much the same. It all lines up, it all does that, and it fits with the exact time that they've got and everything else. And it looks like they have a calendar right there in front of them with intercalated days, which is what he's about to show you here shortly. In this scheme of things, we're right here on this line right now, about right there at my pointer. So we are in Aquarius, leaving Pisces, which was the age of Jesus, and he brought fish, and they have the fish symbol that they always use, like he's fish eating Darwinism or da-da-da and all those type things. That's a symbol of Pisces. Before that, we were in the age of Aries. Before that, we were in the age of Taurus, the bull, which is going to come in handy. Before that, we were in the sacred age of Twins, which is the one right above this. Cancer, the crab, Leo, the lion, and so on. So you wonder why Sumeria used to have a man bull with lion attributes on it and wings. Well, if this right here is the eagle, the hawk, the falcon, whatever way you want to put it, the bird of prey situation, that shows you what was encapsulated in this creature, that people look like a manticore or a griffin or this, that, and the other. Well, look into those two. Those are the same representations and same concepts.
angel. If you divide 25,920 by 4 to determine the duration of each season, you'll discover that it's 6,480 years.
That's an important number we just went over a minute ago. And yet it's in the great cycle of time and everything. What in the world? Oh, there's even more connections than that.
Which is interesting because 6,480 years, as you recall, was the total measure of the dodecahedron. So here we have this same number linking the measure of space in terms of the dodecahedron, 6,480 degrees, and the season of the great year, which was considered to be profoundly important to ancient cultures all over the world.
And this keeps happening with different shapes and different objects and different gods, different planets, things like that. Also through time, space, and it's been represented by us ourselves in the Great Pyramid, which we'll eventually get to.
Who had various ways of representing this fourfold division of cyclical time. All right, then we have, from the ancient Chaldeans, we have what was known as the Saros cycle, which was 3,600 years.
Chaldeans hook up through the ancient Sumerians all the way through the modern times where they ended up getting that name. Of course, they talk about the Chaldeans having a lineage going back with astronomy over 200,000 years. People think that's strange too, but we'll get into the idea of people living a long time and things like that here shortly. But notice that they have one deccan here, which is a small point, and it is 720 or 7,200 or whatever you want to put on there. It's 20 hours, which equals 1,440 minutes. So these things are happening over and over again, right? 2 decans and so on. Well, that's a deacon, like of the church. In fact, what we were looking at there was the zodiac, but that can easily be something that's just like a compass. For it's what we've used to make all these shapes is something else called a compass. And in doing so, we realize that there are connections being made all crazy and through here, and even through the Bible and people. Well, there's cardinal points to the compass and everything. Everybody knows that if they've heard about compasses and things, and that's what we're talking about with the 4 cardinal points and how this works out, which he's going to show you another representation, and it's in Revelations and all that, the end of the world and all this stuff, people. Yeah, but we're right now just trying to get a vocabulary going on with, on the far right, these symbols and shapes, sizes, the numbers that go with those, how that works and correlates with time in the middle section here and going back. But cardinals are a profound person in the church also, aren't they?
We see a repetition of that number. The 3,600, if you recalling and are taking notes, is the number of degrees measuring the icosahedron. Then we have the decans. You'll notice that a Platonic month, which is 1/12 of the great year, right there. You divide that number by 12, you get this number, 2,160. And that number, you may recall, depending on how good your memory is the number of degrees measuring the cube, 2,160.
Which is the same as a circle eventually, but the circle doesn't have its degrees of points. Therefore, you take something the size of a circle and you square the circle and you get its degrees. A square, a block.
And then you'll notice the 2 decans of the ecliptic is, or 20 degrees of the ecliptic, is 1,440, the number of degrees in the octahedron, and 1 decan or 10 degrees. And for any of you who've studied astrology, you know that the decans are important to astrological determinations. 1 decan of 10 degrees then takes 720 years. And so here we have all 5 of the Platonic solids represented in these particular time cycles. And over here, I'm going to mention that ancient cultures all over the world used to run 2 calendars successively. A secular calendar, which is typically like our modern calendar of 365 and 1/4 days, and then they would have a sacred calendar of 360 days, and 5 days intercalated, they would call it. And typically, they would do, whether it was the Greeks or the Egyptians or even the Mayans, ancient cultures all over the world had similar traditions of setting those 5 days aside, and they were considered to be unlucky. And so, really no work, no activity, nothing. Nobody ever tried to do anything on those days. They would just take.
They weren't really festival days or things like that either. You'd think that somebody would do that, but in the in-between, it's just a time of rest. It's another situation. Why? Well, it's 365 days versus 360, because 360 goes with all this sacred geometry. Showing you that the Mayans and people like that had a calendar that equals totally that, and people figured this out a long time ago, and they're like, hold on, they must have known something. There has to be some connections across here, and people tried to, lost tribes of an everything else situation on this idea of like, well, we all flooded away and they all come from the same people, which isn't the reality of it all. That was just a Caucasian religion. It's based on a bunch of mythology, but picking it apart in the mythology, you can find a lot of it in here. But this 360 days to 365, having 5 days left over, is the idea of a solar calendar, and it's a sacred calendar. There's another one that's a lunar calendar, and it leaves 11 days left over off of it. The 12th would be the magical day of flipping over, like our new year and so on situation. And I showed that with that Martin B. Sweatman thing, how they have a total connection to that idea, and they show you a series of ups and downs that are like pyramids, and pyramids flipped over, a icosahedron type shape situation, going back and forth, making the lunar calendar. Then below that, a count of how many blocks that was that made up each one of those, leaving you with the idea that, yeah, but there's 12 days left over, right? Yeah, well, here's 11 marks up and down again, showing you that, yeah, we know this too. And then, whoopsie, where's the 12th one? Well, the sign of the buzzard or sacred creature that takes people up to heaven, the eagle, or whichever way you want to look at it, Eagle Day 1, the Uraeus on the ancient Egyptians had this as a V-neck collar. Well, what? Yeah, well, there's a V-neck collar on Urfa Man, there's a V-neck collar on this, that, and the other, and it all hooks up. Some people see that and they try to call it a death cult, and you're like, look at what we're doing right now and tell me it's not a death cult concept. And all the ones in between. It's all about life too. It's all about everything, people. But whenever I describe how it gets much deeper, sometimes the thoughts that hook up with this are just one of those little flashes that go through my mind, like there's so much connections. And if I went into it right now, it'd be a 5-parter, da-da-da-da. Well, we're doing that kind of right now with the help of Randall Carlson from a few years ago. Let's continue.
Take those days off. 5 days off, then they would resume again and pick up their sacred year of 360 degrees. Now, the Sumerians had a belief that the year was once actually 360 days in length, and that somewhere along, as a result of some cosmic catastrophe of some undefined sort, the day would...
Perhaps the Younger Dryas event, or perhaps it was all going this way with the dinosaurs, and that giant meteor kicked and slowed down the earth somewhat. Or that it once was going that way, and due to being hit over and over a few times in between, we slowly got to the point that coming out of the Younger Dryas, we had made it to where our spinning is going just a little bit slower, enough to where it takes a whole year, but in that whole year it adds up to be those 5 days. I mean, a quarter. That's why we have leap year, to keep catching back up to that quarter if we go 365. Isn't this amazing? Hooking up with Sumerians.
The year was lengthened by 5 1/4 days. And so the Sumerians, who are the first known culture to mathematically divide the circle into 360 degrees. It is believed that one of their motives for doing so was they believed that that circle then could become a model of the year, and each degree then representing one day. So what we have now is a...
Well, the way that works, he kind of doesn't explain it here. The sun is slowly going down more and more instead of straight above us like it would be in the height of summer. In the northern hemisphere, it's going south. And once it gets to a certain point, which is the opposite of Easter, by the way, and the equinox idea, then it's breaking into the point where it's summer in South America, but turning winter here. And then it flips back and forth. Well, each day it moves if you have the 360-degree circle, showing you that they knew we weren't living on a flat earth or any of those type concepts way back in. Showing you this. No, they're showing you they have got incredible math. They're all figuring it out, the length of a day, everything. We still use it today. It's on your watch right now. It's on that clock. It's the way it all works. Amazing. He's holding that handbag of knowledge right there too, that a lot of people make stories, things about though, but our calendar that we still use today is based on it. It's because the sun moves about 1 degree, 360th of a circle as it's going around us. More each day to reaching to the death of winter, and then 3 days later, because it appears not to go one way or the other for about 3 days, and then we can notice that it's going back the other way. So the ancients used to say the Son of God, Shamash here, would symbolically die each year around the cross, or the sign of the Southern Cross that still exists and does today. And 3 days later would rise again to save all of mankind from a nuclear winter of some kind of concept that they apparently knew about. Like they knew it used to be like an ice age, and everything was pushed down and much more to the center of Earth, and still colder there, and so on situations. But that's reaching back through time. I've got other videos that show you that there's a lot of mythology and things like that that actually go back. They're figuring tens of thousands of years, some much longer than that.
Synchrony going on, in that if the year, the idealized or sacred year, is 360 days, then what we have, if you actually picture it, is that the Earth is describing a circle in its orbit, but then in each degree of motion around that circle, it's turned once on its axis. So what we have there is a synchronization of this cosmic motion representing these numbers. So
now you can also think of this as a spoke type concept. You know, like the small arm of the clock goes around and 60 times, and it's moved 1/12 whenever it does in that correlation of it. Well, there's just sacred correlation with what we do with going